Welcome to Scripturology. We're pleased to have as our guest again Dr. Jim Coakley from Moody Theological Seminary. He is the learned professor of Old Testament and Hebrew, here to help us wrap up our series on Genesis and discuss some theological issues that have come up during our study. Now, in our last session together, where we discussed theological issues, we talked about Abraham and why God selected Abraham for special covenant promises. Well, this time we want to ask you to tell us more about the covenant itself. Specifically, is it conditional or unconditional covenant?
Yeah, great question. First of all, I think we have to understand that the phrase conditional or unconditional, those terms, are not used in the Bible. So they're terms that we kind of use to try to summarize what we think is going on. So those are not terms that are there. And so when students ask me, for instance, is the Abrahamic covenant conditional or unconditional? I say it's both. And of course that confuses people.
Maybe we should, for our viewers, define conditional and unconditional.
Right. Conditional would be that something in Abraham, something Abraham has to do as a condition for the reception of the blessings that God has for him. Unconditional is Abraham does absolutely nothing. And of course, it even goes back to the beginning. Sometimes people wonder, well, if it's a unconditional covenant, what if Abraham had never left Ur? Well, how could he receive a land if he never left Ur? So some of those things, again, are not really the main point of what Moses is getting at. But what I find very interesting is you see that there is a history, a trajectory of the development of the covenant theme within Abraham's own life. It's not like he receives the covenant in chapter 12 and then that's it. We read about the call to the covenant in chapter 12, but it's chapter 15 when we have the covenant ratification ceremony where he walks through the animal parts. Then we have a few chapters later, chapter 17, the sign of the covenant, which is circumcision. And then after he nearly sacrifices his son Isaac is when we have another mention of the covenant. So there's at least four touches to the covenant.
Right.
So it's not like it just happened once and is dropped on the reader or on Abraham. So you can kind of see there is a developmental theme. What I like to say is really kind of through that process, it perhaps is maybe somewhat conditioned, maybe not conditional, but it's somewhat conditioned. But by the time we get to Genesis 22, when he obediently nearly sacrifices his son Isaac, after that, the text is pretty clear. Now I know, and because you have done this, all the mentions of the covenant are now completely ratified. So we could maybe say, in a sense, that we're looking at it using that terminology, that it was maybe partially conditional until Genesis 22, but after that point, it's clearly unconditional.
Okay, that's pretty definitive.
Yes.
In our study of Genesis, we've been introduced to the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and then later Joseph. We see in Exodus the Lord God introducing himself to Moses as the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Why would this list of the patriarchs be a designation that God would take for himself?
Right. The text itself doesn't ever give us a clear definition of why he wants to be the God of Abraham, Isaac, and of Jacob. But I do find it interesting. Again, this is something more perhaps speculative, but I find it rather intriguing, is that really with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, we have three different types of individuals. We have Abraham, who was converted later on in life. Right. So in a sense, he is representative of somebody who comes to faith. Then Isaac, who is born into a believing family. So he's like a lot of people who have believing parents. And then we have Jacob, who was born into a believing family, but then was the prodigal and left, and yet came back. So it's interesting that God is the God of all three types, as it were. Those who come to faith by themselves, those who are born into it because of family, and then those who are born into it but then leave and then come back. So God is the God of all three types, and so I find that rather encouraging. It also is interesting, too, that Abram has his name changed from Abram to Abraham.
Right.
Jacob has his name changed from Jacob to Israel, but Isaac does not have his name changed.
Is there a reason?
Well, the text again doesn't tell us exactly why, but one of the things is he is the child of promise. He never leaves the land. Abraham and Jacob both have issues. Abraham leaves during a time of famine. Jacob leaves because of his dealings with his brother and lying to his dad. And so there's tension on both ends. But Isaac is the child of promise. He never leaves the land. He is the one that kind of quietly inherits the promises. And so God is the God of all three types, whether you're converted into the faith, as it were, whether you're born into it, or whether you're part of it for a little while and then leave and you come back. God is a God of grace, and he can be the God of Abraham, Isaac, and of Jacob, and of course of you.
I guess as you think about it, God renamed Abraham, he renamed Jacob Israel, but he had a hand in naming Isaac from the get-go,
right,
from the very beginning.
So he named him from the start.
Yeah, it's not like he had to rename him that he changed his mind.
Right.
That is such a fascinating perspective of the different types of backgrounds and salvation experiences. I never looked at God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as representing those different kind of backgrounds. I think that's fascinating. So thank you so much for sharing that with us. Now, one thing we also noticed is that, okay, our rascal Jacob has some nemesis in his life. His uncle Laban, his brother Esau, and these characters are named after colors.
Right.
Is there some significance to the red-white thing going?
There's, again, when I mentioned last time we were together about the idea of reading literarily, one of the things I find so fascinating is the aesthetic quality and beauty that Moses interwoven into the text as he's telling these stories. So what we see with Jacob is issue of colors. With his brother Esau, remember when Esau was the hunter, but he didn't get anything that day.
Right.
He comes back famished, and of course Jacob is making a stew. The text says it's red stew. And so what does Esau ask? Literally, it's from the red. Kind of very basic. I want the red stuff. Give it to me now. I'm hungry. So what happens is, here's the hunter. Esau is ineffective. But who's doing the hunting here? Jacob is setting a trap with a bowl of red stew, catches his brother, and manipulates him. So he's Mr. Red because Esau is red and hairy from birth.
Right.
So he uses red to capture his red brother. Now we go from chapter 25, where that incident occurs, to chapter 30, where we have now Jacob now in Mesopotamia, Pandamaram, and he's meeting Uncle Laban. Laban is the word Laban, which is the word for white. And so we have Mr. Red and Esau, and we have Mr. White and Laban. And what happens is that intriguing story when Laban is swindling Jacob out of his goods. What does Jacob do? Jacob uses and does this bizarre kind of biological thing where he takes the poplar tree. Now, the poplar tree is actually the white tree. It's the same root for the word Laban. And so what he does is he takes the white tree, peels the white off to reveal the white underneath. So white, like there was red in Esau.
Right.
So he's using white to manipulate Mr. White, Laban, and he's using red to manipulate Mr. Red, which is Esau. And really what that shows is that in this prodigal state, Jacob is superstitious. So he is manipulating, trying to manipulate people, conniving. He's a deceiver. And this is just another example of Moses showing that deception, and he thinks colors is the way to go. Now, in his grace, God allows that to work. Has nothing to do with biology. There's not going to be speckled and spotted calves by white sticks. But that's the thinking, the mindset of Jacob. So we see him in a superstitious state. And, of course, it isn't until his wrestling scene where he begins to recognize he needs to move away from that manipulative kind of way and trust and believe in God. And there's all sorts of these kind of literary things all the way through Genesis. Trees or wood in the life of Abraham. We have the oaks of Mamre, the oaks of Moreh. We have Isaac carrying wood up Moriah. So trees with the letter M. I don't know why it's all there. We have stones in the life of Jacob. We have him sleeping on a stone. We have him removing stones. Right. Stones are a unifying prop, as it were, in Jacob's life. Joseph, clothes. Every time Joseph changes clothes, he changes his status. So trees, wood, Abraham, colors, Jacob, stones, Jacob, clothes, Joseph. These are literary gems that Moses interwoven into the story to just artfully tell the story, but yet get to the themes where we see some of these things going on and on.
One of the things we've seen is wells popping up everywhere. All the action seems to happen at the well. And
all the patrol, that's the, I hate to use the word singles bar, but that was where the people met and got betrothed. We could also say the same thing about goats. Whenever you see a goat enter the scene, look out, there's deception. Jacob uses goat skins to deceive his father.
That's right.
We also have the goat with the Tamar and Judah story, where a goat is used as part of the transaction. Joseph's brothers dip Joseph's garment in goat's blood to deceive that it's Joseph's blood. So whenever there's a goat in the scene, look out, there's deception.
I hope our viewers will find this as fascinating as I have, and we will pick up our discussion right after this brief break.